An I-Team investigation tonight into a link between lead poisoning and violence in Syracuse. Thousands of children are growing up here and have lead in their bloodstream after ingesting dust or other particles from lead paint in the homes they live in. It's happening at a 3 times the rate of children who were poisoned by lead in Flint, Michigan, where lead in the pipes caused a water crisis. Syracuse is also a statistical outlier when it comes to teen violence, with one of the highest rates of child murders in the country. Now a team of researchers at Syracuse University is studying a link between these two things and turning to family court to help prove it. The I-Team's Connor White is looking at how researchers believe this could prevent more children from dying down the road.
That's the handbook that we did.
Stacks of books and papers representing decades of research have brought Syracuse University professors Dr. Sandy Lane and Dr. Robert Rubenstein to a potentially life-saving conclusion.
We've estimated a third to a half of the violence would be cut down by having prevented lead poisoning.
They say lead paint, found in thousands of Syracuse homes, plays a major role in violent crime. So you're saying if we went back in time, took a magic wand and took all the lead out of Syracuse homes, there are kids who have been murdered who would still be alive today?
I believe that's true. I absolutely do.
And they're collecting the data to prove it. Lane and Rubenstein started their research after reviewing past studies that show a strong link between lead poisoning and violence. Violent crime dropped in the United States in the 70s and 80s as the country phased out lead in gasoline. In Cincinnati, a study determined that for every 5 micrograms per deciliter of lead in a child's blood, the risk of an arrest goes up between 27 and 40%.
Biologically, it makes sense.
Dr. Travis Hobart, the head of the Lead Poisoning Resource Center at Upstate, says the evidence backs up the research. Lead poisoning impacts a child's brain development, often leading to problems with impulse control and decision-making.
We can say with some reasonable amount of certainty that being exposed to lead increases the chance that a child will make the kinds of decisions as a teenager or young adult that lead to crime.
To help prove the theory here in Syracuse that less lead means fewer homicides, researchers are looking to Onondaga County family courts, asking them to review records of teens accused of violent crimes to see if they also have lead poisoning.
I think Syracuse would be on the map for doing this.
Activist Oceana Fair with Families for Lead Freedom Now says proving this link would be critical in getting better services to kids throughout the city suffering from lead poisoning. According to the health department, 396 kids were poisoned in Syracuse in 2021, accounting for 90% of all new lead poisoning cases in Onondaga County. Hundreds more fall through the cracks. For example, state data shows about 30% of kids born in 2016 were not tested for lead.
Obviously, we need to make some changes if we're 50 years into it and we're still poisoning as many children as we are.
You can see how the gunfire.
Timothy Jennings Bay with the Street Addiction Institute has dedicated his life to tracking violence and its impacts in Syracuse. He's kept a running map of shootings, showing the correlation between high rates of violence leading to poor performance in schools in those same neighborhoods.
This situation is like a big pot of gumbo. There's so many elements, right, in it that stirred up. So once in a while, something will float to the top. And you say, oh, you could identify it. Let's pull that out and examine it and try to figure out how we got in here in the first place, right? So now we're at that point with the topic of the lead.
Jennings Bay worked with Dr. Lane and Dr. Rubenstein at SU. His map of gunshots lines up almost perfectly with concentrated areas of lead. In areas of the city with higher rates of gunshots, 13.1% of kids were lead poisoned, compared to 6% in areas with a lower rate of gunshots.
It's kind of this cumulative, intergenerational harm. It has its tentacles in everything lead poisoning.
Dr. Lane says there are many factors that can lead to violent crime, but maintains reducing lead in homes and increasing access to lead testing would save lives. In a city where, according to FBI data, teenagers account for 10% of homicide arrests and 13% of homicide victims.
So we need to be asking ourselves, what has happened, what has changed that is causing this violence? What are we missing? And we're not doing that right now as a community.
Hoping to prevent more kids from joining the hundreds that are lead poisoned in Syracuse each year and help those already suffering to avoid tragedy. In Syracuse, I'm Connor White.
My goodness, the statistics in Connor's reporting tonight, they are simply staggering. And we must consider the fact that every one of those numbers is a child. The researchers Connor talked to for this I-Team report say they've had productive conversations with Onondaga County Family Court Judge Julie Cecil about checking child offenders for lead poisoning. If it happens, researchers say not only would the process be one of the first of its kind in the country, it would get children in Syracuse the help they need.
And now to a 13 WHAM exclusive. A Penfield school facing backlash from some parents over changes to its student handbook. As Matt Malloy reports, the new policy from the Charles Finney School says it reserves the right to disenroll LGBTQ students.
But I'm hoping now that people are starting to actually see what's going on.
Heidi Buckler enrolled her daughter at Charles Finney, a private Christian school, in 2018. Her son would soon follow.
When we first initially met with everyone seemed really nice and warm and welcoming. It just seemed like a nice family atmosphere.
Buckler, who describes herself as spiritual, thought a religious education would be beneficial.
They talked about Jesus and the Bible, and we thought, well, that's a great thing for the children to learn about, in addition to, a strong curriculum.
This summer, she received an email from the school about updates to the student handbook. The changes shocked her.
The student lifestyle section in particular, I found hateful. And I had to read it a couple of times to make sure I was reading it properly.
The school said it reserved the right to, quote, discontinue enrollment of some students. Quote, this includes, but is not limited to, homosexual lifestyles or alternative gender identities, and or promoting, encouraging, or influencing other students about such practices on campus.
It goes against everything that I thought that this school stood for, because the Bible says that Jesus loves everyone, regardless. And you are specifically singling out one particular group of children that are no longer welcome in your school.
Finney President Michael Van Leeuwen told 13 WHAM students have never been asked to leave, but, quote, the promotion of alternative lifestyles on campus are not permitted as they do not support our mission as a school. A second parent who asked to remain anonymous to protect her children said the school held a panel on sexuality this past spring that included a conversion therapist. Quote, my son said they never called him a conversion therapist, but said he could work with you to make you not gay. The mom, whose son is LGBTQ, told 13 WHAM. Quote, I was furious. I was sick. I couldn't believe they would actually bring someone in to say these things to convince kids that they need to change who they are. Conversion therapy is illegal in New York State, and Van Leeuwen denies that took place. He said a panel discussion was held on what he called alternative lifestyles. Quote, the messaging was not confrontational or condemning in any way, shape, or form. Assemblymember Jen Lunsford, who represents Penfield, says she has heard from parents about that panel as well. As for the school's LGBTQ policy, Lunsford says under the First Amendment, a religious school has broad protections.
They can effectively do whatever they want so long as it is in line with the ethos and the values of the religion they subscribe to. And legally, they are insulated from most legislative action that would otherwise protect students in public or non-religious settings.
Lunsford says while the school may have the legal protection to institute the policy, she does not believe it makes it right.
This is why you see higher suicide rates among students who are LGBTQ. This is why students who are part of that community are subject to bullying and harassment at substantially higher rates than their other peers. And I think that this sort of language that dehumanizes people causes real life threats to our children.
Buckler says she felt compelled to speak out.
To say that they will disenroll you because of the way that you're born, everything about that is wrong to me. And I think that people should know about it.
Finney's president told me as a private school, parents have a choice to enroll or not based on their personal beliefs. Both parents we spoke with for this story have since removed their children from the school.
Thank you, Peter. We're closing in on the second week of the new school year, and superintendents around Central New York believe it's starting well. Starting one of the biggest question marks, though, as we approach the start of the year, the presence of COVID-19.
Tonight, the county is seeing an increase in the number of cases reported, more than 260 to be exact. 81 came from at-home COVID tests. 73 people are in hospitals. That's also an increase from previous days. Only 5 of them, though, are in intensive care. The county reported no new COVID deaths. Last year, students had to wear masks, at least for part of the year. The year before that, they were subject to virtual learning. But are districts too relaxed with their COVID protocols this year? Our Laura Lagarde is live in Central Square tonight asking that question. Laura?
Megan and Matt, COVID isn't a thing of the past, but school districts like Central Square say they are handling it well. Now, this is after 2 years of facing COVID restrictions. In 2020, students were doing virtual learning. In 2021, they were in school, but they were wearing masks. Now, at the start of the new school year, students can finally walk into class mask-free if they choose. The superintendent of the Central Square School District says it's exciting to see all the kids' faces. However, he says COVID is still here, and even though protocols have been lifted, they are still following some and suggests one to parents.
Whether it's COVID or whether it's the flu, we just really upped our game in cleaning and sanitizing and those kind of protocols. Monitor your child's health. And if they start to show any symptoms, we have more than enough tests that they can come here and our nurse can test the child or the parents can pick up the test and they can test their child at home.
Even though masks are not required, the Central Square superintendent says if you want to wear one, you can do so if you choose, if you feel comfortable.